with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Molly Mowery. She's the president and owner of Wildfire Planning International, which is a Colorado-based company founded in 2013 and dedicated to creating fire-adapted communities through coalition building, wildfire mitigation best practices, and the implementation of land use tools and sustainable policies. She works closely with organizations and communities across the country, including the USDA Forest Service, Nature Conservancy, and the Watershed Research and Training Center to coordinate the Fire-Adapted Communities Learning Network. Prior to this, she developed and managed the Fire-Adapted Communities program for the National Fire Protection Association in coordination with the USDA Forest Service. Molly's previous experience includes land use planning and hazard mitigation positions throughout the U.S. and U.K., where she advised communities in environmental and sustainable planning. She's a past board member of the Canadian nonprofit Partners in Protection and holds memberships with the Planning Association and the National Hazard Mitigation Association. She's presented and published on a variety of wildfire mitigation and planning topics and holds a Bachelor's of Arts from Naropa University and a Master's in City Planning from MIT. So we're very glad to have you. Molly, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Susie.
And thank you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring up your presentation and I invite you to get started. So go ahead, Molly.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks for the opportunity to present this webinar. I see a lot of familiar names in the participants list, so I'm happy to see all of you. And I'll try and pay attention to the chat box as much as I can, but sometimes I'm a little more focused on the slides at hand here. So if I don't respond, we'll get a chance at the end to take the questions and answers and more discussion. So thanks again for your interest in learning more about fire-adapted communities. I'm definitely excited to share some new updates on the fire-adapted communities front. And as Susie shared in the introduction, I work as part of the new Fire-Adapted Communities Learning Network Coordination Team, which I will spend a lot more time telling you about. But first, I want to start the webinar with a very brief policy history on fire-adapted communities. Some of you may already be familiar with this information and actually know a lot more than I'm going to present, but I really want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the background. Okay, so there's really 2 points I want to make here with the background. The first is that the term fire-adapted communities started being used about 10 years ago in national policy. It was actually first called fire-adapted human communities, and this appeared in the quadrennial fire reviews as well as the Flame Act and the National Cohesive Strategy. So the term has been around for a little while, even though I think the perception is still that it's a fairly new concept. And then the second point that I want to emphasize is that fire-adapted communities has been, from the beginning, really focused on increasing community responsibility through greater engagement of more stakeholders and audiences. So FAC really evolved as a concept, and there was this goal that you could take a lot of different programs and tools and resources at many different levels to be used and implemented so effectively that it reduced this extreme reliance that we have on wildfire suppression and response. So in other words, the fire-adapted community really can withstand the effects of a wildfire disaster without significant loss because it has taken so many actions at so many different levels before a wildfire event. So when we talk today about a fire-adapted community, we're really talking about a community that acknowledges the inevitability of experiencing a wildfire and has adapted itself to this reality. So the way that the community is designed, built, and how it operates in a wildfire-prone landscape. And you know, the community, by the way, it just really, this picture shows houses because I think it's a great picture of a wild and urban interface. But in terms of fire-adapted communities, I really like to emphasize that everything matters. It's all of the values at risk. So it's not just the homes, but it's businesses, infrastructure, utilities, highways, landscapes, natural areas, parks, and other cultural treasures, everything that we think of when we live in a community. And we need to take multiple actions, and we also need to engage multiple stakeholders. And a lot of times when we're talking about FAC today, that's these non-traditional stakeholders. So we know typically who we work with, but we're trying to really reach out and get to a deeper level of collaboration. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach, but there is a great toolkit to choose from. A community wildfire protection plan is a typical and common cornerstone for starting out a FAC-oriented approach. And national programs such as FireWise Communities and Ready, Set, Go are also key programs that audiences participate in. And then there are really things that are programs or plans, but we know, or they're not necessarily programs or plans, but we know they help reduce risk. So fuel management and fuel reduction efforts, fire prevention and outreach, regulations and ordinances. These are all ways that help get us further down the road in our fire-adapted community planning efforts. And then I think, as I've come to spend a lot more time doing and talking about FAC in the past years, I think there's a lot of other intangibles that we can't put our finger on here, but we need to emphasize. So fire-adapted communities to me is more than just a collection of these programs and stuff that we talk about and quantify. It's a much more holistic and comprehensive approach, so there needs to be some glue holding all of these folks together and connecting to other initiatives at the landscape scale, as well as other preparedness and response efforts that we all do. And to me, that glue is really the relationship and capacity building that we're all part of in our everyday job. It's why we're on this webinar. It's why we talk to each other and connect with each other and want to continue learning about what we're doing. And so I think it's important to emphasize, too, that FAC hasn't been framed necessarily as a recognition or certification program. The emphasis is really on making FAC a journey, not a destination where you get to a certain point and stop. And so there are a number of agencies and organizations and communities who are actively and have been actively promoting fire-adapted communities. This ranges from the USDA Forest Service and members of the FAC Coalition, many of which their logos are listed here, that represent a variety of agencies from the fire services to the insurance industry to state foresters and fire chiefs and others. And then there are committees and organizations and agencies associated with the cohesive strategy and the implementation of that who are also promoting FAC through the development of their regional efforts and reports and recommendations. And then there are also interested community members, many of which I think that today's webinar would fall in that category of fire departments, fire safe councils, state forestry or wildfire mitigation program staff from across the country that might not have a national affiliation but recognize this is something they want to be involved with and are embracing FAC as a way to frame their wildland-urban interface outreach efforts. So there are now some really great and very, for me anyway, inspirational programs and projects that are starting to get done and turn this national FAC policy into action on the ground. So I'm going to start with a new program called the it's new in the scheme of things. It's actually started about a year ago. It's called the FireAdapted Communities Learning Network. And the FireAdapted Communities Learning Network, or FAC Learning Network, is a partnership between the Forest Service, the USDA Forest Service, the Watershed Research and Training Center, based out of California, and the Nature Conservancy's Fire Learning Network. And the goal of the FAC Learning Network is to accelerate the learning and sharing of best practices across the U.S. that will help communities become more fire adapted. So as mentioned in my bio, I work closely with these agencies as part of the FAC Learning Coordination, the FAC Learning Network Coordination team. And I am excited about this initiative because I think it gets at that glue that I was referring to above, all of that good stuff that happens when people are dedicated to projects and solutions and take the time to engage with others on their efforts. So in terms of engagement, I know there's actually several FireAdapted Communities Learning Network folks from different pilot communities on today's webinar. And as I go through some examples regarding the pilot communities, I just want to make sure that if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat box or add anything to what I'm going to present, you're more than welcome to, and I'll try and call that out if I see anything appear. So there are right now currently 8 pilot communities that were selected last year to participate in the FAC Learning Network. And this year, 2014, that number of pilot communities will double. There are several components to the network approach that I'd like to highlight. First is that each pilot community has one primary, what we call hub organization. And that's a local organization which serves as a primary point of contact, an administrator, and leader, organizational leader within their larger community. So each hub organization in turn works with a number of local or regionally based organizations that are referred to as the coordinating group partners. And those partners add additional resources and support to the overall pilot community. So I'll go through a few examples to help explain this in more detail. And we'll start here with a community called Woodlands Park, Colorado. And the hub organization is called the Coalition for the Upper South Platte. And the Coalition for the Upper South Platte has been a successful nonprofit for the past 15 years. They are working to protect a significant watershed here in Colorado. And their initiatives focus on a number of fire, landscape, and community-related projects that protect and manage and mitigate threats to the watershed. The coalition works with a number, as you can see here, of local, state, and other coordinating group partners. And they've, let me go forward here on the slide. Each FAC Learning Network group has a work plan that they implement, or each hub, I should say. So in terms of the work plan that the Coalition for the Upper South Platte is working on, they do this on an annual basis, as everyone does. And highlights from the work plan in this case include the development of creative messages. So really, how are they getting to that neighbor-to-neighbor level of communication? How are they developing things that people can use? Not just wordy documents, but something more catchy, user-friendly, easy. They're continuing to emphasize collaborative partnership approaches, and they'll also be organizing as part of their work plan and leading some local demonstration projects, which is part of a national community wildfire preparedness day of service, and I'll highlight that at the end of the webinar. They've had a number of successful wildland urban interface fuel treatments and post-fire rehabilitation projects in the past. And that's something I wanted to mention, is that a lot of these hubs have been very active prior to their involvement in the FAC Learning Network. So the work plan activities that I highlighted are new activities, but they've been building their capacity and doing work for, in some cases, a number of years prior to their involvement with the network. So what we're doing is we're capturing and capitalizing on these successes and bringing them into this pilot community network approach. But also thanks in part, in this case, with the Coalition for the Upper South Platte, I think thanks in large part to their involvement with some of their wider and broader partnership collaboratives, they were the recipient of a $1 million state grant to continue their FireAdapted Communities activities. So that's really good feedback for us. We love hearing that we know this is working on the level of, the more people are engaged with others, they're seeing those benefits pay off. The next pilot community I want to highlight here is Towns County, Georgia. And the network hub organization is the Chestatee-Chattahoochee Resource Conservation and Development Council. So Towns County, Georgia is one of 11 counties served by the Chestatee-Chattahoochee RC&D Council in northeastern Georgia. And they've worked closely with a number of coordinating group partners in the past and will continue to expand their local network through the FAC meetings they've been conducting, which really serve the purpose in this case of both educating stakeholders about FAC and then planning new FAC activities. So as part of their work plan, the council is working with the Georgia Forestry Commission to design a new Towns County FAC website, and the Towns County Commissioners signed last November a FireWise Communities Program proclamation for a full week in November. They've also formed a citizens coalition consisting of 9 different participants, some of them residents, one is also including a retired fire marshal. They're very passionate about working with schools and emphasizing classroom learning. So one current example is their work with the middle school agricultural class, which discusses the right kind and the wrong kind of fire. And then they've been increasing their collaboration with other regional efforts, such as the Southern Blue Ridge Fire Learning Network. So they've also reported successes to us with their outreach efforts so far and have given us the feedback that many of their state and federal agency partners have really embraced these FAC activities, and the buy-in has been quick. And so that's exactly what we like to hear and see as part of this network. Okay, so actually I'll do two more pilot communities. The next one is North Lake Tahoe, and the hub organization is the North Lake Tahoe Fire Protection District. So some of their coordinating group partners are listed here. And this area, many of you are probably familiar with on the webinar today, this area has some of the highest value WUI real estate in the country. And at the same time, the North Lake Tahoe Fire Protection District and other groups have had a lot of experience in cross-jurisdictional coordination. So in this case, they've had a really positive and proactive track record of wildfire risk management strategies, which includes pictures here are from their fuel reduction programs that have treated several thousand acres in the Incline Village and Crystal Bay area. As part of their work plan activities for the FAC Learning Network, the North Lake Tahoe Fire Protection District is re-engaging with the public in different ways, really to get back to a grassroots level of involvement that has been a cornerstone of their success for a long time. And they'll be doing this through block parties, community work days, the development of community forestry guides that are more individualized for neighborhoods with specific guidance that really consider some of those extremely local conditions. And meanwhile, they'll be maintaining their Tahoe Fire and Fuels team structure, which they believe was really successful in providing a unified voice to policymakers and good communication with the public. And I see a couple of comments too from some of the folks, so thanks for chiming in on the side there with some updates on your network activities. Jonathan Bruno is with the Coalition for the Upper South Platte, the Woodland Park example that I showed, and then Jeremy made a comment on the work that North Lake Tahoe is doing. So the final pilot community in this case, which I want to mention, is Orleans-Somes-Bar in Northern California. And the network hub organization is the Karuk Tribe. Orleans and Somes-Bar are extremely remote rural communities situated along the Klamath River and surrounded by the 6 rivers and Klamath National Forest. In this case, there's a very rich tradition of tribal cultural burning associated with this pilot community. The Karuk Tribe and other Orleans-Somes-Bar Fire Safe Council partners have worked really hard to create an integrated approach to fire management that features also prescribed burning as well as fireshed mapping and fire planning. As part of their FireAdapted Communities Learning Network work plan activities, the Karuk Tribe will continue their fire management activities and also update their local CWPP, so Community Wildfire Protection Plan, to ensure consistency. So this for them includes refining some spatial data and mapping for key project areas. They'll be holding a retreat to discuss and finalize projects and outreach planning. And on a side note, last year they had planned a retreat and it started and it got interrupted by a wildfire incident called the Dance Fire. And there's actually a few pictures from the Dance Fire featured on this slide. And the silver lining that the tribe later shared with us, the network coordination team, was how they were able to utilize their local FAC concepts on the incident. So due to the increased capacity building that they had done, the role of communication such as Facebook and other activities. So in other ways too, that this network gives us an opportunity to get feedback from something like a wildfire incident where we can learn, and I'll talk a little bit later as we move forward about how we hope to share that learning with the rest of the world. And then finally, I wanted to just highlight they're in the process and have been in developing a number of successful videos and educational materials that help highlight their work. So they already have a number of videos available through YouTube that highlight the prescribed burning and the community-wide benefits they've observed as part of these projects. So for example, they've observed more effective fuel breaks, increased plant biodiversity, increased use by the Roosevelt elk for forage and cover, increased acorn production and quality, and more abundant and higher quality basketry materials. So this integrated approach has really led them to become a regional champion and model for the use of prescribed burning. And it's helped expand their base of support, attracted funding. Again, these were a lot of things that were in place prior to their role in the FAC Learning Network, but now the FAC Learning Network gives them an opportunity to share with others and a greater audience what they're doing. So if you search for the YouTube channel Klamath Media, you'll be able to view a number of their videos, just highlighted here. And again, for all of these communities, for me, this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what I'm showing you to give you a sample of the work that's been happening around the country as part of this pilot community project and the FAC Learning Network. So moving forward, and I already alluded to this, in order to tie these communities together, our network coordination team helps facilitate a number of ongoing opportunities for the hubs to interact. So this is primarily through, so far, network webinars and in-person meetings. And the goal over time is that these interactions among network participants will become very informal. And then regionally based hub organizations will also continue to work with other regional and state-level partners to convene and facilitate workshops and conferences and do that peer learning exchange between the pilot communities and local coordinating groups in their respective geographies. So in this way, the network really enables that in-person and peer-to-peer interactive form of communication, which provides a very hands-on, efficient, effective way to accelerate program adoption and transfer these best practices across geographies. And this thinking is based both on social science research about networks as well as the successes of conservation learning networks and the Nature Conservancy's Fire Learning Network. Our coordination team will also be designing a new blog to help share and grow the interactions of the network with folks who aren't yet part of these pilot communities. I've right now included on this slide a link to the FireAdapted.org general website and the link that will take you specifically more to the FAC Learning Network. And then the blog will be a new feature that we're building to, like I said, help get some of these less public, it's public information, but we haven't yet found a mechanism to make it more public and help everyone learn and share together. So we'll be developing a blog and look for that in the coming months earlier, or I should say later this spring. And then as we continue working on the development of new tools and resources in collaboration with other members from the FAC Coalition or other organizations that will benefit pilot communities and others, we'll share that also with the larger network. So I think the bottom line is we're excited to find ways to bring more good information to light and help everyone understand what's going on and share these best practices. And then finally, our FAC Learning Network coordination team will work with the Forest Service to really evaluate the learning that's emerging from these pilot projects and how it's working as a strategy overall to meet the goals and objectives of the larger FAC agenda. So you can continue to find updated information on FireAdapted.org, FireAdapted.org, and the regional the FAC Learning Network site, and stay tuned for more info as we continue to share and develop it. There are other FAC-related projects that I'd like to highlight. Several of these projects are being implemented through the Cohesive Strategy as pilot projects. I don't work directly with these projects, but I think it's important to make you aware of what else is happening. So I'll tell you the highlights, and I'm able to point you to other contacts or resources if you're interested in more information. So just quickly, the states of Montana, Idaho, and Oregon are working in partnership with the Forest Service to implement projects that take a very integrated approach to reducing wildfire risk and protecting natural resources and, of course, communities. So each of these pilot projects is designed to become a model for implementing the cohesive strategy in the West, and they take that unified approach by incorporating the three goals of landscape resilience, fire-adapted communities, and wildfire response and suppression. This example is the Island Park Sustainable Fire Community Project in Idaho, and it's already begun developing and implementing a longer-term strategy to achieve its goals. So this community is, if you're familiar with it, it's a resort community located west of Yellowstone National Park, and it's a major winter and summer resort destination. So the project partners in this case will be, among other things, updating the county CWPP and creating an evacuation plan for really high at-risk subdivisions, as well as working with private landowners to reduce hazardous fuels on their public and private lands. And this is in addition to other landscape initiatives that address bark beetle and spruce budworm outbreaks and other collaborative efforts that have been designed to implement many of the specific actions from the Western Regional Action Plan. This project is also a cross-border project with Montana, and that'll allow for further coordination across borders, I should say. And then another example, too, with the Cohesive Strategy Pilot Project is the Blue Mountain region of Northeast Oregon. Again, some of you may also be familiar with this already. And this project is as well taking an integrative approach. I mean, I think the theme here is that anything to be called FAC now really has to take an integrated approach to work on a range of different activities. So some of the tasks that they'll be working on is also a more robust CWPP, developing an integrated information, education, and awareness program, and promoting fuel treatments in and around the communities that, where they can better coordinate among more partners. I don't have it listed here, but the forestandrangelands.gov website has a lot more information on the cohesive strategy, as well as links to the Western Regional Strategy Committee, where you can find more information on these. Okay, so I guess I have a lot of time left for discussion because this is actually my second to last slide. But one of the things I really wanted to highlight too was I just spent a lot of time on national efforts, and I want to acknowledge that I know there are many local and state efforts across the country that have been taking or just started taking a FAC-oriented approach. So for some folks this is not new, for others it is, and either way that's great. Just a few examples here from my own past year of traveling and going to conferences and whatnot includes some more locally based grassroots FAC conferences. So last fall, the City of Austin's fire department put on a FAC symposium, which they designed for homeowners, local officials, fire professionals, and other policymakers to attend a one-day workshop and really learn about how they could take a more holistic community approach to their wildfire risk. And then another example is also from last fall when the South Central Washington RC&D Council, the National Association of RC&D Councils, and the International Code Council presented a Washington State Wildland Urban Interface Conference, and they really used FAC as an organizing theme to address issues facing the built environment. And then coming up on May 3rd, 2014, the National Fire Protection Association will be working with other FAC Coalition members to promote a National Wildfire Community Preparedness Day. And although that's called national and I'm talking about local efforts here, the reason why I included it is because they're going to be really working at that local level to engage and encourage volunteers to help make their communities more fire adapted through a variety of service projects. So more information on that is also available at FireAdapted.org. And then I know there are a number of other fire safe councils, local and state programs, and other jurisdictions that are doing FAC activities, as I mentioned. So I would encourage everyone, if you know of it or you want to share something, to put that in the chat box now. I mean, this is one thing I like about webinars that I think we use more of is that interactive feature that people I see are already using. So please feel free to chime in and share your own kudos if you'd like. And also on this next slide, I have my email. So I would love it if anyone wanted to send me a quick email after that and just update me too with their FAC activities. because as I continue to talk about this and the network and help other people learn about FAC, I'm always happy to include more success stories. So let me know if you have one. And then I know that we, like I said, have plenty of time for questions, discussion. I think that Susie and Tim have been tracking the questions here if there are and have been any that come up. So like I said, you can do it now. You can also grab my email and send me something afterwards, or if you just want to send a comment, that's good too. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Molly. That was great. That was very comprehensive and interesting overview of everything going on across the country. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and bring up our conclusion layout in which the chat box is a bit larger so that people can see what's going on. I invite you to ask Molly any question you might have after her talk by asking it in the chat box there. I'd also like to encourage you to check out the web links. If you see in the middle bottom box, we have web links. What you do to get to those is to highlight the link and then click Browse To, and in your browser, it should open up those links. So we have our Fire Science Consortium email list sign up, also webinar registration. We don't currently have any additional webinars planned, but occasionally we do host them based on interest. So if you have something interesting you think we should pursue as a follow-up to this webinar, please let us know. And you can do that by signing up on our email list, or also we hope you'll take our evaluation survey of this webinar, which will only take you a few moments, and you have a live link there to get to that. So it looks like we are getting some questions in the chat box. So first one, Molly, for you is from Julie Conley. She asks, how do these communities overcome the challenge of finding funding for the kind of coordination that is required to create these coalitions? Which is an excellent question. So,
yeah. Well, I think one of the things we're seeing even early on in the stage of the FAC Learning Network is that with a emphasis of the Learning Network is not so much that they get a direct funding to do the coalition, but they're finding that as they do the coalition activities and reach, like I said, that broader group of stakeholders, they're using that as a way to leverage money from other sources in the future. So the Woodland Park example I'll call out again, and if Jonathan is still on the chat and wants to chime in too, he's welcome to. But you know, in this case, because funding is more and more limited, as we all know, the greater success that you have of getting it is to show how much bang someone's going to get for their buck. So in this case, the more stakeholders that people are able to pull in and meet multiple management objectives, the more success they're having in turning around and getting funding for that. So I think gone are the days of very specific projects. And I know that's kind of a general answer, but it's also hard because each pilot community is a little bit unique in how they pursued funding, where they started out with their funding, and how they're leveraging their work to get more.
okay, Julie also has another question. Do you have any pilot examples from non-forested ecosystems?
Yeah, let me think for a second. Non-forested meaning less wildland-urban interface, or Julie, do you mind clarifying that?
I imagine she means rangeland areas or areas in the Midwest, areas that aren't specifically a forest ecosystem, but you know, yeah, there she says grassland, shrubland, rangeland.
Not yet, but one of the things we're really looking for in the next set of pilot communities that we're working with, that we will be working with, is broadening the geographic diversity. So we'll be looking at a range of different qualifiers and different reasons to, you know, like I said, broaden the diversity through either geographic reasons as well as, you know, who else is engaged and how.
And she Julie also followed up by saying, for example, areas where the problem is too much fire rather than too little. So I imagine what she means is perhaps rangeland or shrub areas that are burning more quickly than they would have before fire suppression. For example, Southern California would be one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just thinking for a second who I would put under that category. Julie, let me, if I can, follow up with you on that. Because there's other folks, too. Unfortunately, they couldn't be on the call today because they had a different meeting scheduled, but there's other folks in the network. I'm certainly not the only brain behind it, and I think we can give you some more well-rounded examples. Oh, and I see Jonathan, too, chimed in on the first question that Julie had about the funding. Thanks, Jonathan.
So he's basically saying that having this organization and network together, this is helpful in seeking grants elsewhere, basically. Is that how you understand his comment?
Yes.
Molly?
Yep. And I think it goes back to having a good track record of success and being able to build off of that in Jonathan's case.
That's great. I see a lot of networking going on in the chat box. Specifically, there's been a lot of conversations about North Lake Tahoe. And then we got another comment from Jeremy Bailey from the Nature Conservancy Fire Learning Network. He says there's a lot of benefits when communities work together, and he'd like to see a prescribed fire added to the list of elements that you had there in one of your first slides on what a fire-adapted community is.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying for sure, Jeremy. I think what we found as that model, that diagram has been used over the past couple of years, that it's a good model, but it probably could go with an update on some of the links that we have, like I said, too, to other landscape scale initiatives or initiatives that are focused on the WUI, but they haven't been listed there. There's a number of things that can go into that diagram.
Great. We also had a question from Jennifer Mislevy. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. She asked, can you give us an idea of where the next set of pilot communities will be?
I can't yet, but I can say that as we work on broadening this next set of pilot communities, like I said, we'll be looking at how we can achieve a higher level of diversity and really showcase, a number of communities and that may not be just in the West or in one other geographic region. So we'll be looking at a number of factors as we look at the next set and see how we can broaden the learning network and what we learn from it.
And I'm sorry, did you say when the next set of communities would be identified? Is there a time frame?
It will be June of 2014.
Okay. Great. Looks like there's some more questions coming in. Julie asked another question. Do you have any examples where the military is involved, such as training ranges or installations, etc.?
Gosh, I don't know at this level. There may be some coordinating group partners that have interfaced with the military. I'm not aware of them, but that doesn't mean they haven't happened. I just, one of the benefits of the network is that there's so much happening, but there's so many details, it's a little difficult to track. So I'd have to reach out to the network and get back to you if there are some more specific examples around that.
Okay, great. So the next question is from Kevin Conway. He asks, how can you help community organizations without the capacity to handle landscape level treatments to scale up their efforts?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that really gets at the heart of the network is recognizing some of the capacity limitations that people have, but really showcasing how building those partnerships with other organizations, whether it's through, for instance, the Nature Conservancy and the Fire Learning Network or other organizations that are working in an area, and establishing those relationships to make more connections. Because I think what we're finding and really seeing through examples of the pilot communities is that the people are out there. There's so many people doing the work. The idea, though, is how do you connect to those people and get to that level? So you may not have the resources to do something, but you're aware of how you can connect. I know that sounds pretty straightforward, but I also know it takes a lot of time, and that's another thing that I've learned from looking at the interactions of the network is that there's just a lot of commitment and long-term dedication to those relationships. I mean, sometimes it's years before headway is made in terms of getting to that point where you have a real partnership. But I would say, I don't know, Kevin, where you are from or what community you're working in, but there are probably more resources than you realize. So if you want to expand on where you are, I think even over the webinar, we might be able, some folks here might be able to brainstorm some ideas.
Great. Looks like we have a couple more questions. One from Julie Conley was asking how to organize field treatment projects in situations where there's issues of poverty or the elderly. And one of the attendees suggested, from his experience, he helped a homeless shelter train with a forestry department to provide landscape assistance to seniors for free. So I guess really in general, maybe the question is, does that seem very common in the communities that you are affiliated with?
Well, actually what I'll say is, I'm going to reach back to my days of working more with the FireWise Communities program, and I think you see it everywhere, but specifically with the FireWise Communities program, there are a number of communities that have engaged with different populations, different demographics, including some that are, retirees, and we tend to, generally speaking, sometimes there's a stereotype that, retirees can't get work done, which is not what we see. In many cases, they're extremely active. There's ways they figure out how to do this, even if they themselves don't do the work. There's a lot of great efforts, too, around engaging youth organizations to help partner with like a day of service event so that there are folks with any, need some extra support on getting brush clearing, chipper days, et cetera. There's a lot of great partnerships happening, and that's, like I said, I've seen through FireWise Communities program activity days. I see it happening a lot. I'm just trying to think if there's another specific example. I see Jeremy has a couple people are also adding some thoughts here, Jeremy and Melody and another person, about how they're using university students or 4-H or Boy Scout girl, or 4-H or Boy or Girl Scout troops to help too. So, I think the theme is that we keep touching on is how there are existing resources and people that we can use that, we may not traditionally think of, but it's happening.
Great. It looks like there may be some additional comments that we'll just paste in. But I don't see a whole lot of other questions at this point. I guess the major question that occurs to me is, so I guess I'm not exactly sure if I followed whether or not the network, is it something that you join as a community, or if folks on the webinar right now are interested in being part of the network and are not, what do they need to do?
Well, right now, the best thing to do is follow updates on the FireAdapted.org site, and then as soon as we get our blog launched, I think that's going to be an amazing way to, I mean, I know everyone and their brother has a blog, but I really think that's going to be an amazing way for us to continue community conversations like the ones we're having right now in the chat box. If you have seen one of the pilot communities on today's webinar, one of the 8 right now, and you see the opportunity to connect with them because you're in the area, you know some of the local coordinating group partners, etc., by all means, you're encouraged to. You can contact me after this and say, hey, I want to follow up with more information on X community and get more involved. That's great. When we roll out the next set of communities, you can do the same. So I think this process will continue to build. There's not like a formal sign-up anywhere or something where you join, because I think what we'd really like to see is, even if you're not a pilot community per se, we all want to be encouraging this kind of conversation and network building.
Great. And I think, can you remind me of what the actual web link is?
Sure. For the FireAdapted site? Yeah, I was just going to see if I could can I type it in here somewhere?
I can put it in the links below if you give it to me.
Okay. It is FireAdapted.org /region/FAC-Learning-Network.
FireAdapted.org /region /what?
Oh, I just
Oh, you got
typed
it.
it in there. Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really where people should be following up with their additional questions and ideas.
And they can email me, and if I don't know the answer, I can share it with the files or the network coordination team. There's certainly others. I see even Wendy Folks has chimed in here from TNC. There's certainly others part of the coordination team, so we can all help and get answers back to folks too.
Well, that's great. Here's my last call for any additional questions for Molly. And while we're waiting to see if any more questions pop up, I just wanted to remind you about the web links there with our email sign-up and webinar registration. We have an evaluation survey for this webinar, and we hope you'll fill that out to give us feedback on planning additional evaluations. And then I just typed in that Learning Network link as well. So it looks like we have one additional question from Dolores. She says, we need ideas. We have communities with limited capacity to accomplish projects proposed in areas they don't have enough personnel to move or cut timber or thick manzanita or pinyon juniper. So if any of the folks on the line or you, Molly, have some ideas for her, that would be great. And she adds that these are pretty rural areas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I was also reading the comment too from Cheryl Page. I just wanted to address. Hi, Cheryl, and I agree. It would be great. That's one of the things we hope to do with the next set of communications that we're working on is getting our lessons learned out from what the hubs are learning. Especially, I mentioned some experienced wildfires last year. I'm sure that's not the last time, and how they've engaged policymakers, for instance. So that's some of the information we're working on that'll either appear through the blog or through other technical briefs that we'll be working on and highlighting, which again, we'll share it as widely and broadly as possible. And then as far as Dolores' question, I mean, it's a great question. It gets at the heart of the community work that we're all trying to do and the challenges that we all have. I see Jeremy just has a good comment for Dolores about taxes or bonds or neighbor volunteer groups or fundraising and then hiring contractors. So, I mean, I think that's a great start. Again, I don't know where Dolores' communities are based, but I think the bottom line is there are a number of programs and resources out there. I'm not sure if, let's see if she has I see some comments. Sorry, I'm trying to follow the comments along. But I think that some of the programs through FAC, such as FireWise and Ready, Set, Go, are sometimes a great starting point because it gets people to engage neighbor to neighbor with the fire departments. And those are free resources online, and that's what sometimes can be the motivator to help people take action. So there's definitely free resources out there as a starting point. And again, that's all through FireAdapted.org, that you can connect with some of those coalition members and their resources directly.
Great. That sounds like a great resource for anyone with these questions, so they don't need to be working in isolation. So it sounds like a great service. It looks like there's plenty of good chats going on in the chat box, and we will go ahead and just leave that open after we conclude the webinar so people can chat back and forth if they'd like to for a few minutes. Barring any other additional questions, I don't think I see. I think we're mostly seeing comments and suggestions for Dolores. I'll go ahead and say thank you to our speaker, Molly, for a great presentation, and thanks for everyone for attending, and call our webinar to a close. Like I said before, you can certainly stay on and chat amongst yourselves, and please do fill out our eval survey. So thanks very much, everyone. I'm turning off the audio now.